Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of Shmuel Aleph, the first book of Samuel. We are in chapter 20, verse 18. We read of the beginning of a conversation between David and Yehonatan, David and Jonathan, where David was now certain that Shaul, that King Saul, was out to kill him. And now the tide had flipped, so that Jonathan was doubtful. Jonathan still thought there was some hope left, that his father didn't want to kill him. Jonathan put some stock in the promise that he extracted from Saul, from his father, not to harm David, and maybe he hoped that Saul's recent spiritual experience with the prophets might have brought him around to recognizing that killing David would not be right. However, so they devised a test. David gave Jonathan a test that he should do in order to determine if indeed Saul was out to kill him, if there was any hope for David to remain in the royal palace without endangering his own life. So what happens here is that David said tomorrow is going to be the first day of the new month, the Rosh Chodesh, and there's going to be a feast, which apparently they had on the first day of the new month every month, and I won't show up to the feast. And when it's noticed that I'm going to be gone, you can ask and the king Saul will notice and will say, "Where's David?" You tell him the plan was you tell him that you gave me permission to go join my family at a family feast in Beit Lechem, in Bethlehem. I pointed out in the last podcast that this would serve to remind Shaul of David's family and where he came from, and a feast in Beit Lechem, which would remind Saul most likely of the fact that David had been anointed king back in Bethlehem, although it's never said this explicitly. But one would imagine that by this time Saul was already aware that Samuel was behind David, and that David was anointed a king at a family feast in Beit Lechem. Now, which was celebrated by Shmuel, by Samuel, when he brought a sacrifice way back a couple chapters ago, in the beginning of this story. Now, Shaul has several options. He can react neutrally and just say, "Okay, fine, David's gone." In which case, it means that despite being reminded of David's potential for becoming the next king, he's okay with it. He'll let it go. In which case, Jonathan can communicate that to David, or he could react with anger, in which case it'll be obvious that there's no hope. So now Jonathan is going to repeat it. Jonathan and David we just finished where they promised each other that they would always be, their love will be everlasting, and then they'll always support each other. And Jonathan is now going to tell David, "Okay, I'm going to fulfill your plan. I'm going to do as promised." Vayomer lo Yehonatan. So Jonathan said, "Machar Chodesh, tomorrow is going to be Rosh Chodesh, as we had discussed. V'nifkadeta, and you will be noticed that you're gone, right? It will be pointed out, ki hipoked moshevecha, because it will be noticed when people look at your seat that you're not there. V'shilashta tered ma'od." So this is what I want you to do. I want you to go down far, right, on the third day. In other words, you need a hideout in a place where no one will know that you're there, so the people will could easily think that you went to Beit Lechem on the third day. So there's going to be tomorrow is the day of Rosh Chodesh, and then the next day is going to be another feast, and on the third day, you're gonna be hiding out in this field. I want you to go to that place, so that by the third day you will be in that same place, the same place where you were hiding on the day of that event. The day of that event is presumably referring to the day where they had a similar plan, where David was hiding behind the rock as Jonathan brought his father Saul out to the field, in which Jonathan made the case, Jonathan made the case to Saul why his life should be spared and that he should be supported, and Saul made him that promise. So that was the day of the promise, which Jonathan at this point is still thinking might be holding. He still might actually hold by that promise and not hurt David. V'yashavtan, and make sure that you stay etzel ha'evan ha'azal, by the Ezel stone, the Azal stone. It must have been a prominent feature of that field. There was a big stone. So hide behind there so that I know where you are, so that I'll make sure that you hear my message. Ani and I, shloshet hachitzim tzida ora, I am going to shoot 3 arrows to the side of that stone. L'shalach li lematara. In order, that's what I'm going to use as if it was my target. So I'm going to shoot 3 arrows next to the stone. So this way, what the plan that I'm about to, the method of me letting you know what Saul's intent is will be fulfilled, because this is what I'm going to do. Verse 21, I'm going to send my assistant, my boy that accompanies me and carries my weapons, go and find the arrows that I just fired and bring them back. Im Omar Lanar, and I'm going to have to call out to him, and because he's going to be near the stone, so I'm going to call out to him. The arrows are to the side of you. If I use that language to describe how to find the arrows, then kachenu vavoa. Then you can I'm sorry. Go get them and come back. In other words, I call out to the boy, and I say, the arrows are, they're over there to the side of you. Then go get them and bring them back. Kishalom lach. Then you, David, will know that there is peace for you, ve'ein davar, and there's no issue. We're all just making a mountain out of a molehill. Saul was angry, but he's recovered. Everything's fine. Chai Adonai, as God lives. However, if I say to the young man, la'elem here is a term sometimes used for, it's often translated into English as a lad. It's similar to the language used for a young girl, alma. So this is the male form of alma. So elem just means the young boy. But if I tell him that they are past you, they are farther than you, beyond you, then lech, then you got to run, kishilach Adonai, because clearly God is sending you away from the royal household. And the agreement that we spoke about before, the agreement of friendship that is between us, between I and you, the oath that we made before God will be between you and I forever. So David did as they had agreed, and he hid out in the field. And it was the next day came, the first day of the month, Vayeshev HaMelech al el halechem le'echol. And the king sat down by his food. This is one of the several places that's used by the rabbis to demonstrate that the word lechem is a reference to food in general. Obviously, they didn't only have bread. They had other foods at the king's feast. But it's when they sit down to eat, it's called, breaking bread, so to speak, is sometimes used even today. Vayeshev HaMelech al moshavo, and the king sat upon his seat, his special seat for the king, kipam bepam, like he always did, al moshav hakir, which is near the wall. One would assume that the king sits next with his back to the wall, so that no one can sneak up behind him to assassinate him. This might be somewhat of a sign that he was paranoid, and the verse is stating this because it wants you to realize that he's paranoid, which makes, and when he's paranoid and feels vulnerable, he's more likely to lash out in anger, which partly explains his irrational anger towards David. Vayakam Yehonasan, and Jonathan got up. Vayeshev Avner, right? And Avner, Saul's general, sat mitzad Saul, on the side of Saul, which is presumably his regular place. And then David, who's also supposed to sit, I guess it sounds like on the other side of the king, vayipaked makom David. And it was noticed that David's place was empty. V'lo diber Shaul me'uma bayom hahu. And Shaul did not say anything about David's absence that day. Ki Omar, because he said, and again, this Omar means he thought. Several times we use the term Omar, which literally translates to said, but it means he said in his heart, meaning he thought to himself, Mikreho, there's some chance something must have happened. He couldn't make it. Biltita Harhu, possibly, maybe he is not pure ritually. Maybe he has some contamination. Maybe he had, some kind of. One of the ways it would be assumed is maybe he had a seminal discharge of semen. He had sex the night before, so maybe he couldn't. And then the commentaries say that because they may have been eating at this feast from sacrifices that had been sacrificed at the altar, so maybe that you're not allowed to eat that if you're not ritually pure, and one would have to go to the mikvah to immerse in the mikvah and then wait until nightfall. So it's not nightfall yet; it's the daytime. So maybe he's not tahar kilo tahar. Maybe he is not pure, and therefore he's not here. So in other words, it didn't impress him. It could be one day, but the next day, verse 27, vayimi macharata chodesh hasheni, and it was on the next day, the second day on which they were celebrating the new moon, Vayipaked Makom David, again it was noticed that David's place was empty. Vayomer Shaul el Yonasan beno. So now this can't be. By now, even if it was, he had not immersed yet or whatever, by now it should have been taken care of. The night fell, he should be pure now. So why is he not here? And whatever event may have happened twice in a row, Vayomer Shaul el Yonasan beno. And Shaul turned to Yonasan. Now, obviously, Shaul knew that Yonasan was a good friend of his. This was something that was known, right? We mentioned that before. So that's why Shaul immediately turned to Yehonatan and asked him, where's David? Madua lo ba ben Yishai. Why did that son of Yishai, that son of Jesse, not come? Gam Timol, not yesterday. Gam Hayoma, not today. Alalachem, to the meal, to the food. What's going on? Now, the way he refers to him as ben Yishai, again, it gives us the hint that he understands that the David's family background is one that is a threat to him. His family background from Judah, from the tribe of Judah, his family background from the family of Yishai, which was a prominent family, and the fact that Samuel had went to anoint a king from the family of Yishai, from the family of Jesse. Vayan Yonasan es Shaul. So Jonathan answered Saul as follows: Nish'al David me'imadi. David asked me permission ad Beit Lachem, to go to Bethlehem. Vayomer, and he said as follows: Shalcheni na, please send me, please allow me to have permission to travel. Ki zevach mishpacha lanu, because we have a family festival, a family feast, ba'ir, in the city. V'hu tziva li achi, and my brother, asked me to come. He sent a message asking me to come join at the feast. V'ata, and now if I find favor in your eyes, please help me. Imolta na, give me permission, v'era esechai, so that I can go and see my brothers. Al kain lo bo el shulchan hamelach. That's why he did not come to the table, to the festival, to the table of the king. So here David is, this Saul takes, he gets all of the hints, and instead of allowing for David to leave, he flew off the handle. Vayichar af Shaul b'Yonasan, and Saul became enraged, right, at Jonathan. Vayomer lo, and he said, Ben na'avat hamardut. Now this is you son of the rebellious woman. This is just a matter of a curse. It's like people. I'm not going to use the vulgar language. People say son of a blank. It's a very similar to term here. It's just a very very crass way of referring to your own son, who's the crown prince. And calling him Ben Na'avat Hamardus, and deliberately that way, because we're getting verse is giving us the sense of Saul as being enraged and completely lost his handle and control of his emotions. Halo yadati. I know already, that you are choosing as a successor to me, right? You are choosing the son of Yishai. And this is into your shame and shame on you. And this is also a shame on your mother's nakedness. Again, this is a very crass way of referring to your son and saying that you should be ashamed of yourself. You're an embarrassment to your family, an embarrassment to your mother, that you're choosing Ben Yishai, the son of Jesse, over me. As long as that son of Jesse, that son of Yishai, is alive on this planet, on the world, lo tikon atom malchusecha, you and your kingdom will never be established. So you will never be able to be king yourself. Viata, and now shilach v'kachoso elai, go and find him for me, get him for me, and bring him here, kiven mavesu, because he needs to be put to death. Now, this makes it clear, if there was any doubt until now, that Saul understood and realized that David was to be appointed the next king, and Saul obviously did not want that to happen. And now he sees that his own son, instead of taking the advice that Samuel gave him, and instead of doing the right thing, which could have been done, and graciously hand the kingdom over to David, right? When his own son would have wanted that, where his own son Jonathan would have allowed that to happen. It could have been a peaceful transition of power. Instead, he chose the opposite path. Vayan Yonasan et Shaul Aviv, and Jonathan answered Saul, his father. Vayomer Elav, he said to him, Lama yumas, why should he die? Me'asah, he has not done anything. He didn't do anything, right? What Jonathan is advocating for here is David did not rebel against Saul. David was a loyal servant of Saul. David helped Saul's kingdom. He led the armies in victory. He never did anything to disrespect him. Saul should, Jonathan is really pushing for is for Saul to hand over the kingdom peacefully, in a peaceful transfer of power. There's no reason to make this into a fight. However, Saul saw it otherwise. In verse 33, Vayotel Shaul et Tachanis alav, and Saul completely lost control of his emotions, and he grabbed his spear lahakoso, and with the intention of striking down his own son. It's not clear if he threw the spear at it. Well, Vayotel actually sometimes means to take, but here it probably means he took and threw it. Obviously, he missed. Vayeda Yonasan, and this was as clear a message as anyone can possibly get. Jonathan now knew that it was a clear decision, and there was absolutely no chance that he would change his mind, that his father had decided to kill David. So, Jonathan was himself angry and got up from the table in anger. His father had just attempted to kill him in public, and he did not eat at that feast on the second day, ki netzav el David, because he was very upset about the situation with David, ki echlimo aviv, that his father had humiliated him at the feast. Now, vayiba boker, and the next day, on the third day, as planned, vayetze Yonasan asod l'moed David, Jonathan went out to the field, to the meeting place where he was going to meet David, and there was a young boy with him. Vayomer lenaro, and he said to the young boy, Rutz mitzana et achitim, go find the arrows asher anochi more that I'm going to shoot. V'hanaratz, the boy ran, v'hu yarah chetzi lahaviro, and he shot the arrows over the boy's head. Vayavo hanar ad makom hachetzi, when he got to the place where the arrows asher yar Yonasan, that Jonathan had shot, had landed, vayikra Yonasan achrei hanar vayomer, and he called out to him and said, Halo achetzi mimcha v'hala, the arrow is beyond you. Vayikra Yonasan achrei hanar. And Jonathan called further and said, Meheira chusha al tamod, run, hurry up, go get it, don't delay. Vayilaket nar Yonasan es achitzim vayavo al adonav, and he picked up the arrows and brought them back to his master Jonathan. Presumably, this telling him to run fast was done deliberately to tell David that number one, now you got the message, because I said that the arrows are past you, so you know that Saul is coming to kill you, but you better get up and run soon, because his rage is so bad that if you don't leave really fast, he might catch up to you. The young boy didn't know anything, didn't get the hint, didn't realize that anything unusual was happening. But Jonathan and David did know. And Jonathan gave his weapons, his bow, his arrows. He gave it to the boy that was with him. By Yormalon, he told him, Lecha, go bring them back to the city. I'm going to hang out in the field a little longer. And Narba, the young boy, left. V'David kame etzel hanegev, and David got up from the southern side of the field. Vayipol la'apav arza, and he fell on his face to the ground. Vayishtachu shalosh pamim, and he bowed 3 times. This was a way they greeted each other with friendship. Vayishku itesh re'eu, and each one kissed each other. Vayivku, and they cried ishet re'eu, one over the other. Ad David higdil, and David cried even more. David obviously was going out alone into the unknown, and he was losing his close friend. Jonathan obviously was going to be turning back and going back to his father's house. Vayomer Yonasan David. So Jonathan said to David, Lech l'shalom, go in peace. Asher nishbanu shenenu, that we have both sworn to each other. Anachnu, both of us, b'shem Adonai lemar, in the name of God we swore. Yiyeh beini uveinacha, that God should be Adonai yiyeh beini uveinacha, God should be between you and I, uvein zari uvein zaracha ad olam, and between my children and your children forever. It was obviously clear to Jonathan and to David that this parting of the ways was going to be long term, and that this was not just a parting of the ways between 2 people, but had implications and was going to have implications for the future history of the people of Israel. Here is where we see what could have been. Friendship could have brought about a peaceful transition of power. Friendship could have kept the people of Israel united. Just Saul, who represented the tribe of Benjamin, the other tribes. David represented Judah, and when eventually this was going to lay the seeds that was going to eventually lead to the rupture of the kingdom several generations later. This was an event that love could have avoided, but hatred, unfortunately, was the path that was chosen by Saul at the time. So this concludes chapter 20. Thank you so much for studying chapter 20 together. Looking forward to studying the next chapter and, of course, the entire book of Samuel together.